Hey guys, today I'm going to be showing you the full process of how I made my Batsuit. As you can see here, I have all of it done. I am so sorry that this video took so long to make. I had an absolute blast making this suit though. If you like this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. I was actually a little worried because I thought I wouldn't have enough footage, and wouldn't you know it? I had a goddamn lot of footage. I mean, seriously, my editor would stop responding sometimes just from me scrolling through it. Note to self, edit these kinds of videos as you're making them. Anyways, you guys enjoy? Here is the making of my Batsuit. The first thing I made was the collar, and this actually took me a few tries to get right. I ended up having to revise a template, which I'll link and credit in the description, and had to look for the right size and curvature for the collar. And then I had to laser cut all the pieces out of EVA foam and put it together with contact cement. After that, I used a sewing needle to add the stitching detail and then coated it in Plastidip. For the cape, I used about 4 yards of this synthetic leather that I got from the fabric store. I cut out 8 panels measuring 72 inches across. Needless to say, this made the cape absolutely massive, so I did end up having to trim it down a couple times. Then I used contact cement to fix the cape to the collar piece. As for the cowl, I bought it from an online website that I was somewhat apprehensive about at first, but I decided to take my chances and they delivered. My problem? The thing looked a little ridiculous. The biggest issues were that the ears were super asymmetrical and the jaw opening was just way too loose. I mean, it's a relatively cheap one-size-fits-all, so by no means is it a bad product if you ask me. It's just not what I was unrealistically hoping for. Electrical tape turned out to be my savior in this case. I had plenty of it, and it sticks super well to the inside with the latex. In order to fix the ears, what I did was I created these little inserts out of foam and steel wire so that I could be able to just adjust them and reform them as I need to. And honestly, that already made a huge difference. Like, as long as the ears are symmetrical, or the mask in general is symmetrical, it looks infinitely better. Another good modification that I decided to do to the cowl was I decided to actually add the neck pieces that are present in the film. To do this, I used foam pieces that I laser cut, and then after that I also, much like the collar, added stitch details with a needle. After that, I coated all of them in Plastidip, and then I glued them all into this one removable piece that you can attach to the cowl with Velcro. I should also mention that I used a lot of foam padding on the inside around the head so that it could better fit my head shape, as well as just provide more comfort as well. The final modification that I did to this cowl was fixing the issue of the jaw. The opening was way too big, as I mentioned earlier, and the way I got around this was I actually cut a slit in the middle at the bottom, and then I kind of just glued it together so that it would be smaller, and then the second fix I had to do was I used 3D printed parts to actually like maintain some form of shape around my mouth. And after I made the jaw hole smaller, well, let's just say that it was at this point that I began to understand why they made the mouth hole so big to begin with. Another modification I pulled off was that I actually used perforated paper that I got from Hobby Lobby in order to try and make the white eyes from the comics. This didn't quite pan out, as I just simply decided that I wanted screen accuracy, so I cut the eye holes out a little larger and was going to opt for makeup instead. But it still looked cool nonetheless. I might end up making another cowl that has this feature instead. Also, in January to early February is when I got most of the designing done. I modeled almost all of the parts in Fusion 360, I worked on the torso first, and for the entire duration of the process I was mostly using whatever set photos and images were available to me as reference. Most of the modeling was relatively simple. For the most part, I just had to create sketches of all the armor panels and then extrude them onto curved surfaces. The most complex part I had to model was probably the chest plate. I may or may not be releasing these files at a later time. And the fitting wasn't too difficult. I just had to take a bunch of measurements of my own body and then just match them as best as I could with the armor pieces. Moving on to actually printing the suit. All of it was pretty much printed on a Gigabot 3. There were a lot of pieces, usually the smaller ones, that I also printed on my Enders at home as well. I went through quite a lot of spools and quite a lot of failed prints, as many of these were multiple pieces and they took a long time. Sometimes almost even 2 days. I think the shoulder pads took like a day and a half each. Though I may be wrong. Either way, it was somewhere around a day. I think in the end I ended up using around like 6 or 7 spools, also including failures. Again, I may be wrong. And now for the chest plate symbol, I actually laser cut the pieces individually out of 16 gauge welding steel, then I stuck it together using JB Weld epoxy. Following that, I spray painted it black, and then I used a weathering kit that I got from Hobby Lobby as well as a bunch of other paints, just to get that really nice look that it has in the movie where it looks a little worn out. For the most part, I just experimented and hit the edges with a little bit of silver paint, as well as adding like a little bit of rust and soot here and there where I felt appropriate. Funny enough, the whole time I was doing this, I kept thinking about, when the first time the suit was revealed, a lot of speculation was going on. Ooh, the symbol is made out of the gun that killed his parents. A big one I was hearing was that he was going to be able to remove it and like use it as a knife or a batarang. So I kept thinking, you know, maybe I should make it magnetic and removable, but honestly, I just thought, it's not a removable knife. That's ridiculous. And then that actually happened. So, sanding was also a very lengthy process. I sanded it going all the way down from 80 grit to 1200 grit, mostly using an orbital sander. This took me a while. I did a lot of sanding at home. I did a lot of sanding at the lab. And yeah, the whole smoothing process was just a pain in the ass. And after finally post-processing all the 3D printed parts, I just spray painted it in this glossy paint that I bought at Home Depot. I do sort of regret that I had chosen a different paint, since this one did have a gloss finish, and that's not exactly what I was going for. So I ended up having to sand it down some more, and I painted over it more with some acrylic to dirty it up a little and give it more of a closer to a matte finish. One of the problems I had to get through, aside from actually finding the right shade of gray, was getting all the shades of gray to match, especially when it came to between the 3D printed parts as well as the fabrics. I considered using spray paint, but normal spray paint would crack on the flexible fabric, and using something like a vinyl or an acrylic spray paint was something I also considered, but I couldn't find the right shade of gray for that. So my solution was simply to just dye the fabric, and for that I used graphite color RIT dye. For the pants I used a gray pair that I found lying around my house, but I decided they wanted to be a little darker, so I threw them into the pot and began to dye them. In order for the fabric to keep its now dyed color, I had to use a fixative separately immediately after dyeing them. After stirring the fabric thoroughly for about 15 to 20 minutes, I would remove the fabric and then put it into a separate pot where I'd then add the fixative. Following the fixative application, I had to remove it and rinse it, and then I would need to allow it to dry for a while. Now, for the rest of the fabrics that were involved with this suit, I used polyester that I found lying around my house. I had about 4 yards, so I had plenty. Then I would go on to repeat the same exact process I did for the pants with this stuff. One of the details that I wanted to include in this suit was the pant armor panels that he has in his suit. To do this, I laser cut 3mm EVA foam panels, and then I covered them in fabric.
I also went the extra mile to incorporate the little side details that he has as well, using a few yards of paracord and putting it on the sides. Then I had to make the torso piece that all the armor pieces would actually be glued onto. And to do that, I followed basically the same process that I did with the pant armor panels. I just took a big piece of foam, I used a heat gun to flatten it out a little bit, and then I put it in the laser cutter and cut out the pattern that I had designed for it. And then I would do the same thing for the bicep pieces of the suit. At this point in time, I had about 2 weeks left to make my suit. I pretty much had most, if not all, the armor pieces done, but there were still some things left to 3D print, some of which I hadn't even designed yet. For starters, I needed to actually design the gauntlets. This was one of the last things I designed, along with the utility belt pieces. I printed out the gauntlets to be worked on later, and then following that I started designing the utility belt pieces. With all the parts 3D printed, I was ready to get into the final stages of post-processing them and painting them, but I had a bit of a problem. See, for some reason, in the month of February, the state of Texas, where I live, decided to be abnormally cold. I mean, it wasn't freezing, but it was cold enough that it was going to mess with my spray painting process. So I had to do a couple things. Firstly, I borrowed an external heat source from a friend of mine. The second thing I did was put the cans of spray paint in water for about half an hour. And here I am finishing up in detail painting some of the parts on the utility belt. Now the boots I used are from Walmart and they're really similar to the ones that are in the film. But for the actual boot pieces, unfortunately I didn't have any more money to go buy real leather, so I opted to also make them out of EVA foam. I followed pretty much a similar process. I cut them out with a laser cutter, and then I stitched on details to make it look like the actual thing. And then using my can of Plasti Dip, I tried to make it look a little more like leather instead of foam. Getting back to the gauntlets, I brought the pieces out and then decided to do some final smoothing using filler primer to fill in any imperfections that were left. And then I hid all the pieces with some black spray paint after I smoothed them. There were still some things I needed to make before I could fully assemble the gauntlets. For one, I needed to work on the sides, and I needed to create the straps that he has on his gauntlets, which are also the quote-unquote blades that he has on the side as well. And then I 3D printed ends for those. And there's also the metal rods that he seems to have in the new movie as well. And for that I just used this aluminum rod that I found at Home Depot. I do slightly wish I had opted for 3D printing them instead, since in the movie they have actual detail to them, whereas I just kind of inserted straight metal rods. My thought process was that I wanted a more authentic look, so I used actual metal. It still turned out looking pretty good. I cut the rod with an angle grinder, and then I smoothed out all the edges that were left. I laser cut the sides as well as the blade pieces, and then I added details and coated that in Plastidip. The final assembly of the gauntlets wasn't too difficult. For the most part, I just kind of superglued / hot glued everything together. The straps aren't actually functional, unfortunately. They kind of just get glued onto the sides. So the only way I can really put on the gauntlets is just by sliding them really tightly over my arms. After painting and everything, I just glued the rods to the gauntlet panels, as well as added the little elastic strap that you can see on the gauntlets as well. And finally, I just attached the side panels to the top and bottom and kind of glued that together. There were still some armor pieces that I wasn't quite satisfied with as far as being smooth, so I went ahead and post-processed those some more. I used files to get some of the edges out, as well as using filler primer on most of the sides. And here I am dry brushing all the side pieces over with Once I was done with all the pieces, I had them all laid out. I glued down all the main torso armor pieces onto the actual suit, and I used a bunch of acrylics among other things to weather the suit down a little bit. Give it a dirtier, worn out look like it does in the movie, because the thing is, if it looks brand new, not only does it take away from screen accuracy, but it also gives it a kind of cartoony look, especially if it's just all one flat color. And much like the film, I was going for realism in this case. And here I am dry brushing all the side pieces over with gray, getting rid of all that gloss that I didn't like. The weathering for the suit really just made a world of a difference. I managed to get all the pieces that were originally just a flat single gray color to look absolutely beautiful. I also used umber brown on a lot of the fabric in between the armor panels to mimic a lot of the dirt and grime that Bruce would realistically get during his crime-fighting nights. I also used brown for a lot of the rust effects in the metallic areas of the suit. Now, if you look closely at the suit in the movie, you'll also find that there's these little, like, side stitches / lines on the ab pieces of the suit. So I went ahead and I printed out some of those and painted them in the same color, and then I used super glue to attach them to the suit. I did a little more detail work on the symbol and the chest plate as well, using soot and rust primarily, as well as silver on the edges of the symbol. Really just adding a lot of detail and beauty to the suit overall. Went back and did the armor panels too, and again, the grays and everything else just really made a world of a difference as far as aesthetic. I really think that the work I did really took that suit from being just a plain gloss gray to just looking absolutely incredible. After finishing up the torso, I did some more finishing work on the gauntlets as well. Here I am inserting the final blade pieces onto those little straps of foam that I made, and then just adding all of the shading and other detail as well. I finished assembling the bicep and shoulder pieces, and then painted over the details. I also cut this tube as well, which goes on the sides. The rest of the work I did on the suit was pretty much mostly detail work. Some paints here and there, and I did this thing where I put baby powder all over some areas of the suit to also add some more weathering effect to it. I especially applied this effect to the gauntlets, the boots, and the utility belt. I did this effect with the leg holster, the gloves, the pants as well. Pretty much any area that had too much of a plain color to it really added a lot of detail and more of that dirty look that I was getting. There are a couple downsides. Unfortunately, it made quite a mess while I was doing it, as well as the fact that I don't really have any sealant for it, so it kind of just sits there until it eventually easily gets scraped off. So I may have to figure out an alternative or a sealant in the future. At least if I want to keep it on there for a long period of time. And after all that painting and detail work, the suit was pretty much done. And I've set up this little thing where I keep my bat stuff. Fortunately, I don't have a display mannequin quite yet. Alright guys, so just a quick overview of how this whole thing goes together when I'm actually wearing it. Right here we have the main torso piece with all the armor panels glued on. You have the laser cut steel symbol right there. And now on the other side, it's not quite as pretty as you'd imagine. But basically the way this goes on is right here we have the shirt. And there are multiple points on it at which you can actually Velcro the suit. And it holds a lot better than I thought it would. And that is in part because these buckles right here is actually where the cape attaches. And the cape kind of acts as a counterweight so the armor doesn't fall forward as much. One of the things I love about this suit is that I can actually really move around in it. I mean, I can't jump up and down and do backflips and whatnot, but it's surprisingly mobile, all things considered. And this Velcro piece right here is about where the cowl attaches, just to help pull it down and fix that jaw issue I was having earlier, as well as just keep everything centered and in place. We also have the detail tubing on the sleeves of the shirt that I have glued down. So it attaches at the center, the sides, as well as the back of the shirt as well. And we also have these straps, which also attach back to the back of the shirt. Now, one thing I do regret is I do wish I made the chest panels a little thinner, because when the cape goes on, it does this weird thing where it kind of squeezes out the straps a little more, but I'm sure I'll fix that in the future. On the shirt, you also have the detail tubing glued on as well as Velcro spots for the shoulder pads, which I'll get to in a minute. I do sort of wish that I had gone with a different shirt, or at least tried to color this somehow, since it doesn't match quite as well with all the other pieces, but it still works out just fine. And also I kind of ran out of money when I was deciding on a shirt, and this was about the cheapest that I could find, so it still works out. Over here we have the utility belt. Now, if I had the money, I would have actually bought the weaved leather belt that I saw that looks exactly like the movie, but unfortunately I didn't. So what I did was I actually took my if I can find it. There we go. This is actually a Star Wars Jedi belt that I got from my trip to Disney World last summer. And I basically just added all the Batman-looking pieces onto it, except for this part. This was already here. I got this off of Amazon. This looks exactly like the movie. I do wish I had the opportunity to make this out of actual metal, as well as find a way to better actually authentically attach it to the belt. But again, things that I can fix in the future when I have more time and more money. We have the gauntlets, and again, the only real good way I can put this on is just kind of sliding it on over, which isn't terrible, especially with the gloves in front. It does get a little loose, but for the most part, like if you throw a few punches, it's gonna move around, but it's not gonna fly off. And the utility belt, actually, there's a center Velcro piece right here, and it just attaches right there. Here we have the side holster. Luckily, still some baby powder on it for that beautiful effect. Just attaches to the side of the utility belt right here, goes around the leg. Now here, we have the shoulder pads, and much like the torso, also not as pretty on the other side as you'd think. This took me a while to find the right angle to attach foam to it, because what happened was I kept moving around my shoulder, and it would just keep snapping off, and the shoulders would be super loose, bouncing up and down when I'd walk or run around. So, definitely want to fix that more in the future. Maybe I could use some kind of elastic strap right here to keep it more fixed. If there's one area where mobility is lacking in my suit, it's definitely the shoulders. I can hardly raise my arms over my head, but other than that... Fortunately, this shoulder pad came out a little messed up off the printer, and I did as best as I could with smoothing it. But yeah, another thing is, here's failed attempts from me trying to use contact cement to attach it, which obviously when I tried moving my shoulder when it's attached with Velcro, just... So that's when I came up with the idea of just use this foam. This didn't come out quite as pretty as I'd liked. I definitely wish I had 3D printed this piece or something, and I wish I had the money to buy like some kind of actual strap, because the foam, when you look closely, the foam can get a little cheap looking. Again, most of the flaws that come with the suit comes from me having both a lack of time, since I was trying to finish before the movie came out, as well as a lack of money. And the cape, to keep it over the shoulder, it just kind of sticks right here onto this little backwards piece of tape, which isn't the greatest, but it works well enough. And finally, over there, we have the boot pieces and the boot gaiters that I have attached. These don't stay fixed quite as well as I wanted them to. When you start walking, it kind of slides up. And the zipper's a real nice detail, though. A little bit of damage there already. Overall, I'm really happy with the suit. I'm glad the way it turned out. It has its problems, but given what I had to work with, again, I feel like it turned out pretty nicely. Main improvements to note is I hope in the future, if I ever get a chance, to use a more matte paint, since that's what it looks more like in the movie. But I've had some friends tell me that they actually prefer the glossiness of this one, so if you guys agree with them or disagree, go ahead and let me know. I definitely feel like the cowl was the weak point of my suit. Again, it was just a product that I bought and just heavily modified. I did manage to make it look quite a lot better, but again, weak point. But I do wish I had the time, money, and actually the experience, since kind of lacking in this area, to cast my own cowl. I would have 3D modeled it and done it that way. And finally, movement-wise, the main thing I want to work out if I ever make another Batsuit is keeping these in place better and more shoulder mobility. But again, overall, still really proud of myself, still really happy with how this turned out.